Hello, everyone. Welcome to a brand new AF chat. This is a slightly different one and also a really fun one, I think. And you can see next to me, this side, is my good friend David Barnard, who I've known for a long time. I put industry veteran in the description for the video, but that's because David has been around for so long and has seen so many things. I think the insight we're going to hear today and the discussion we're going to have today is going to be as real as possible about subscriptions. So welcome to the show, David. We're going to wait and let people shuffle in while we say what's in our cup in the chat. I'm drinking, what am I drinking? Earl Grey tea in my Appfigures mug, my go-to at this point. What are you drinking, David?
I'm drinking a little coffee, and shout out on the mug. This is a Greg mug. Just had the founder Alex on a RevenueCat webinar. Actually, incredibly thoughtful guy and thoughtful enough to send me a mug. So love the mug more than what I'm drinking. Just a little black coffee.
That's awesome. There's something magical about branded mugs that everyone just wants them, uses them, likes them, and they're really just the most useful swag I've ever given and ever received in my life.
Yeah, for me, hats is a close second.
Really?
I might be wearing my Zero hat otherwise. I wear that on a lot of calls. That's another great app that I love. So yeah, if you want a way to my personal heart, it's a great mug or a great hat.
Coming soon. We actually send swag boxes to all of our AF chat guests, so you will be getting them.
Oh, nice.
So while we wait for people to shuffle in, again, drop in the chat where you're from, what's in your cup, because that's always interesting to hear. David, tell us a little bit more about yourself, how you became the industry veteran that I introduced you as. No pressure.
Yeah, I mean, there's a 30-minute version of this. I'll try and give you the 90-second version of this. I was a recording engineer and not making any money, not ever seeing my wife working. I was working, 2 p.m. to 2 a.m. and she was working 9 to 5.
Oof.
I was like, I got to do something different. And the iPhone had come out. I famously, you've probably seen on Twitter, I was the first person in San Antonio, Texas to get an iPhone. I drove down there to meet up with my brother, and was just blown away by the iPhone, and was a huge Mac nerd, working in a recording studio, and was just blown away by the ease of use. And so when rumors of the iPhone SDK started happening in the fall of 2007, I got pretty excited, like, hey, this could be an amazing business opportunity. So I actually founded my company days after Steve Jobs took the stage and introduced the iPhone SDK, which is what it was called back then. And I have been building apps ever since. I initially started working on learning how to code and got like 3 weeks into that and realized, wow, this is actually a profession. I could see why it takes years. And so I ended up hiring a contractor and kind of never looked back. So I'm one of the rare folks in the industry who has been an indie app developer for 14 years now. But I don't actually code. So I've worked with a lot of really great partners and contractors. Never hired an employee, actually. Try to always keep my overhead low. And also just never made a ton of money. I mean, I did all right for myself, but never had one of those like wild successes. So anyways, yeah, I've been building apps ever since. I've sold 3 apps. Interesting context to this conversation today, I started transitioning my apps to subscription around 2017, and was beating my head against that wall for months and months, where our monthly subscription wasn't renewing properly, and we were doing local receipt validation and server-side receipt. We were doing everything wrong because it was all so complex, and we didn't have a lot of back-end experience. And so I just got so fed up with it. I was like, guys, we got to build features. Our users don't care about our subscription backend. They care about what our weather app does, what our Launch Center Pro does. And this is ridiculous. And so I actually stumbled upon RevenueCat as a customer, not as an employee, and started implementing RevenueCat into my apps before I even joined the company. And having experienced that so deeply personally, of of like not being able to ship features because the programmers I was working with were spending literally days and weeks troubleshooting subscription bugs. I was like, I just knew this was a huge problem and knew RevenueCat had a huge opportunity. And so I ended up chatting with the CEO. One thing led to another. And I am now, and have been for 3 years now, a developer advocate at RevenueCat. And since joining there, it's been kind of a master's degree in everything subscription apps. So as developer advocate, I'm hosting a podcast, the Subclub podcast. We actually have a private Subclub community. If you want to join that, it's chat.subclub.com. There's a wait list there. I do webinars like this for RevenueCat, and then guest on great shows like Ariel's here, and then do like weekly office hours where I talk to subscription app developers. And so I've really kind of been inundated for 3 years now in the subscription app space, and just learned a ton from CEO level to marketers to growth to indie developers who are thrilled to be making $300 a month, but trying to grow that. And so been completely immersed in this world for 13 years, and then subscriptions specifically for the last 3 years.
That's pretty cool. I mean, what a ride, right? Like the last 13 years, 14 years have seen so many ups and downs and so many changes. I mean, think about it. We didn't even start with in-app purchases, and then in-app purchases got invented, and games turned them into subscriptions without subscriptions, and now we have full subscriptions. And one of the things that we were talking about just before we got started is how it's so easy to fail with subscriptions and yet still pretend to succeed. And I think that's kind of a problem, because that's not going to continue for a long time. And what I mean when I say fail yet succeed is it's super easy these days, thanks to companies like RevenueCat, to get subscriptions in your app, and thanks to things like App Store optimization, Apple search ads, to get users to pay for your app. Not all the users, and not in a way that's super optimal. So you might be making a little bit of money and thinking, okay, I'm doing it. I'm doing subscriptions. But it's not really a matter of doing subscriptions. It's a matter of just putting something on the App Store. And because a lot of it is still new, we've been in this for a few years, but a lot of it is still new enough, you will make some money. But you're not going to make a lot of money, and with not a lot of time from now, I think it's going to become a lot more difficult as more and more companies, more and more companies and people understand how to do subscriptions right. So I invited David here to talk about, kind of have a discussion about what's the future of subscriptions. Normally, I do more hands-on, what can you do right now? How do you improve your app? But I feel like thinking for the longer term, especially with something so important as the subscription revenue model, is really an important task for anyone. Whether you're thinking about going to subscriptions, and there's one question in the chat already before we even started about should I go to subscriptions if I have a successful growing app within app purchases, which we'll get to in a little bit. But if you have a subscription app right now, what does the future hold so you don't lose money, or so you can make more money? And one of the questions that I think can kickstart this, that I'm sure David will enjoy answering, is do people want subscriptions at this point? Because when things started, people hated the idea of subscriptions. When we started Appfigures back 13 plus years ago, everyone said there's no way you will succeed with a subscription platform. 13 years ago, I told them, let me try. I'm here today, and we're growing. By the way, we're hiring. So if you're looking to if you want to work with me, there's going to be a link in the description, which will have all of our positions. We're hiring for everything, marketing and technical and anywhere in between. But that's thanks to subscriptions. And have you seen, David, a shift in acceptance of subscriptions over the last few years?
I think we're in the process of it becoming more accepted and less frustrating. I think what people get frustrated at is when they run into subscriptions to products that don't really deliver value over time. So, a great example of this is a scanner app. For me, I don't use a scanner app very often. And so, I want to just, if I could pay per scan, I'd probably choose that over a subscription because I just don't use it that much. But if you use a scanner app week in, week out, it's part of your business flow, it's part of, your whatever flow you're working on, it totally makes sense to be charged for that as a subscription because you're continuing to get value from it over time. And so that's where I think part of the future of subscriptions, and you might be surprised to hear me say this as like RevenueCat developer advocate, but part of the future of subscriptions is finding other better business models for apps that don't work as subscriptions. And that's where I think some of the frustration with subscriptions is exactly that, is that if you're trying to transition an app that isn't used frequently, that isn't providing value over time, that isn't improving, that isn't adding more content, that isn't adding features and things like that that really benefit the user over time, then you're kind of part of the problem. You're not you're that paywall where somebody gets there and is like, another subscription, seriously. Mm-hmm. Like, I mean, a good example, I had a weather app's actually a great example of one that needs a subscription, because I have a weather app, Weather Up, and we have costs, and we're about to launch Apple Watch complications and widgets, home screen widgets, and those are expensive. Every 15 minutes it's hitting our server, and then we're hitting multiple data source servers every time that's called to get alerts, to get different forecasts, to get short-term rain predictions. And so that's an example where I think people are understand, it's a weather app, like weather data costs money, therefore a subscription. Another app I used to have was a mirror app. It was like, check your teeth, put on makeup, those kind of things. That I would never transition that to a subscription. Before I sold it, I had a single in-app purchase to disable ads. And the lifetime value of any one customer in that app, even though they do maybe use it every day, I just don't think that's the kind of app that makes sense for a subscription. So then stepping back to this kind of concept of subscription fatigue, and I've talked about this before, I think that, and I was kind of getting at this with that other line of thinking, is that it's not subscription fatigue, it's value fatigue. It's that if people don't feel like they're getting the value out of it, if you're charging, $60 a year and they're not getting $60 a year worth of value, then yeah, they're, fatigued at paying that kind of money. But when you're delivering on that value proposition, when you're actually improving their lives, when you're improving their productivity, when you're giving them something valuable in return for that subscription, and you're delivering that value over time, I think it's a more equitable exchange of value. And those are the apps that I think really are thriving under subscriptions versus the ones that are kind of not offering a lot of value over time, or even, we've seen this a lot of like tricking you into subscribing and then using, $10 a week subscriptions and things like that. That's what I think is generating some of the ill will around subscriptions. And there is a fundamental kind of concept of, people don't like spending money. So, when Starbucks started charging $4 for coffee, I'm old. I'm in my 40s. I remember in the early 2000s when Starbucks was like getting bigger and bigger, people used to joke and call it $4. And like, why would you pay $4 for a cup of coffee? Now you go in and you get I get a grande nitro cold brew and it's like $6. But over time, we've acclimated to, and I personally feel the value of getting a consistent, great nitro cold brew at a Starbucks anywhere in the world is worth $6. So there has been a little bit, I think, of a kind of consumer mindset shift that needed to happen. Of people were used to like, Facebook is free. Snapchat is free, Google is free, Google Maps is free, Apple Maps is free, Apple Weather is free. Like, why should I pay for software? But I think what we've seen over the last probably 8 years is this slow trickle of like really fantastic apps that really deliver enough value that it started to change that perception of like, oh, wow, if this app improves my life, it's worth paying for and worth paying a subscription to. And I think, there's a lot of great examples. One of my favorites is a RevenueCat customer and good friend of the show, Jake Moore. You've had him on. I've had him on the podcast and webinar. He ran an app called Fitness AI, and the value proposition of that is super clear. You pay $60 an hour for a trainer. You pay $60 a month at least for a good gym membership. So paying $60 a year for an app that enhances those experiences, maybe replaces a couple of training sessions, and definitely kind of improves your workouts that you're paying $60 a month for, no brainer to spend $60 a year. And so I think, the Calms, the Headspaces, even, Blinkist and Speechify, like there's just so many great apps now that really are truly delivering value that people benefit from, that I think we have had this trickle of, oh, software is worth paying for. Software is improving my life. These apps are actually something valuable. So there definitely has been a transition, but I think there's kind of those layers of it, of like, there are definitely bad experiences with apps that shouldn't be charging subscriptions. There's definitely apps that aren't delivering on the value. But I think we're kind of getting to that point where consumers do understand the value, and subscriptions are a great business model for enabling companies to build that value.
Absolutely. I mean, you touched on so many things. I don't even know where to begin. I'll begin the beginning. So I totally agree. I think the idea of subscriptions being the solution to all monetization is incorrect. And because it's new enough and because there's a lot of transition, some apps may think, oh, let's make money with subscriptions. It's horizontal revenue, as someone told me back in many, many years ago. You don't have to get out of bed and you're still making money, which is a really attractive proposition to anyone, indie developers, small teams, big teams, really anyone who wants to make money and has the ability to make an app. But you run into this case where it's like, it doesn't fit. What do you do when it doesn't fit? And the answer is you don't do subscriptions.
Don't
but
do it.
I feel like also that's going to be one of those corrections that will come to the App Store and to Google Play and to the market in general, 2023, probably even very early, because you have so many scams right now. The scanners, the I don't even know where to begin. The entire utilities category is full of apps that on launch will tell you, subscribe, $40 a week. You need this, don't you? No, not at all. Not really.
Yeah.
But yet enough people do it that I think it's worth it. And I did something on my newsletter. I have a weekly newsletter where I cover news trends from the App Store and Google Play. And I looked at the number of top apps out of the top 100 grossing apps in each category and which of those do Apple search ads. Because that's kind of a loose proxy to saying, well, they have money to invest in promotion because they know that if they rise up, they'll get more downloads. And they know that those downloads will convert to revenue, so it's worth it. It's not an ROI negative sort of campaign. And utilities was one of the top categories because they know that once they launch that app, they will make some money, even by mistake. That's bad.
Yeah.
I think that's really bad.
Right.
And that causes that sort of fatigue or unpleasantness or really the desire to not do subscriptions. And I know enough people that still look at subscriptions and say, I'm never going to pay for a subscription app. And I think in general, that's getting smaller and smaller over time.
Yeah.
So that's not going to be what we see in the future, especially not when all of the top grossing apps are using subscriptions right now.
Yeah, I think one of the self-correcting mechanisms as well, and huge credit to Apple, and I think a lot of people don't give Apple enough credit here, and Google to a similar extent, is that it's really easy to cancel. It is really easy to cancel. And Apple does a great job of emailing you and everything else. And so I think part of the self-correcting mechanism is these apps that shouldn't be subscriptions or that are, tricking people into subscriptions or whatever. They're going to find it harder and harder and harder to trick people because people are getting more and more and more comfortable turning off subscription. And we see that in our data at RevenueCat. We look at subscription trial cancellation rates, churn, and things like that. And, we see some pretty crazy numbers. We actually just shared a post recently that the lower quartile of weekly subscription retention at year one is 1%, meaning that which you would hope, right? It's like a weekly subscription probably is meant for a more short-term thing. Like, you don't want to be paying a weekly subscription for a year. You should switch to the annual plan. We didn't dig in to see how many folks transition from a weekly plan to an annual plan or a monthly plan. But that gives you a pretty good idea that there's not this like massive number of people who subscribe for $40 a week and then just leave it getting charged for years on end.
Yeah.
It's like people know how to cancel these subscriptions.
Yeah.
And they do.
At this point, I think it wasn't the same even a year ago, 2 years ago, and now it's becoming easier and easier. And I think it's a double-edged sword, because it means that enough people are now using subscriptions to the point where they've used it with so many other services. Your app is probably not going to be the one app that makes them think, I don't want to do subscriptions. HBO Max, a bunch of YouTube-related things.
Yeah.
If you're on,
and that's been an interesting trend too, is to see HBO Max, where people will subscribe for Game of Thrones and they'll unsubscribe for the 6 months that there's not a show they don't want to watch. Like, I think people don't like. There are scams. There are obviously scams, but I think in general, consumers don't get enough credit for being ultimately quite rational.
Yeah.
That, because Apple makes it so easy to cancel, consumers are rational. They'll subscribe for 3 months and they'll turn it off. And HBO, to combat that, is now very heavily promoting their annual plan because they want to get enough content out on an annual basis so that you're not subscribing for 3 months and churning. So the ease of canceling, which is so fundamental to subscriptions being a net positive to society generally, and then to software specifically over time. It's just something I'm personally super passionate about, is that being able to cancel easily, which Apple makes very easy. And I think there should be more consumer protection laws on the web to make, it's similarly easy. You shouldn't have to go through 10 different check boxes and call somebody like the New York Times did. That, I can't believe there isn't already a law against that. And I think there should be. But the ease of cancellation is what's going to force good behavior and normalize against the rational consumer. So rational consumers are subscribing to HBO for 3 months while they have their favorite show and then uncanceling. And so what's that doing? HBO is now heavily promoting a discounted annual tier to meet those customers where they're at, to normalize their revenue. And that's how this industry evolves, is by doing things that are more friendly to the consumer and then normalizing against that rationality.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, again, that makes so much sense. The one thing that we knew when we started as a subscription business was that, unlike most of our competitors and most apps in the business tools market who lock you into a year of service and you can subscribe for a month, even if you really want to, we said we don't want to do that. And everyone said, oh, you're going to have a lot of churn. Oh, you're not going to have consistent revenue. Oh, you're not going to have this or that. And at the end of the day, if you understand your numbers and you follow the trends and you follow your data and you know how to do your product and you know how to do your growth, that's the kind of behavior that I actually want to encourage. I want to encourage people who, for example, on our end, do App Store optimization very extensively for a month or 2 months or 3 months. And then after that, just kind of downscale to a monitoring sort of capacity and don't have to pay those very high costs. They're not really very high. We're extremely affordable, but high in a sense that you have to pay more and you feel like, I don't really want to pay more if I'm not going to use it. So we have this sort of philosophy that you should only pay for what you need. And we actually named our plans that way. We have an optimized plan and we have a monitor plan. Which one do you want to do right now? And that's a philosophy that I think will have to move on to others.
Yeah.
One of the things that I've seen with WWDC this year, Apple Pay Later now will also apply to subscriptions. And I think that's a very powerful tool. Something not enough people talk about, because it's kind of obtuse to think about it, but you were just saying that if I'm HBO Max. So if I'm any developer who's trying to get that consistent revenue or lock people in for a longer time, I can't force them into it. I have to make that a thing they opt into, and a huge discount is a great idea. But there is this sort of understanding now that you can pay it with payments. So it might not be the same as paying monthly. It might be 6 payments or 3 payments with Apple Pay Later. But it's still a huge, huge benefit, I think, to developers. So you can actually excite people about your annual plan as opposed to just make them feel like, well, we have to do this because you never want to do that. Right. And that's one of the things that every time we talk about subscriptions here on the show, I talk about a lot of the marketing that you have these days, whether it's paywalls or really any other way to upgrade, is all about if you don't upgrade, you won't get this. You won't be able to access locked content. You won't be able to blink. And I think if you think about it the other way around, once you upgrade, you will have access to this. Once you unlock, you will have access to this. That's it might seem like nothing in the grand scheme of things. It's just we changed one word, but really we're changing the mindset behind what are subscriptions. What are subscriptions offering us? And that's access to something new. They're not taking away anything from us, which I think is what makes thinking about subscriptions very difficult, but also thinking about them in a way that you don't need them always because you don't need that thing always, and that's okay. And that's, I think, a huge trend that as we get closer to the end of this year and the beginning of next year, we'll see becoming a necessity, not just a nice optimization.
Yeah. And along those lines, I think another kind of future of subscriptions topic is the monetization of free users, because there are going to be a certain number of people who either genuinely just can't afford your product, or in their stack of priorities is not high enough, but they really want to get some value. And so for apps that can do a good freemium tier, I think we really need to see some evolution of business models around some other forms of exchange of value. And I'm not sure what that looks like yet, but I'm hopeful that we'll find some better ways to do that. And an example is right now, you mostly monetize that freemium tier through ads. If you have a freemium tier and you want to monetize that freemium tier at all, some apps choose to not monetize a freemium tier, and they do kind of separate features from the pro tier and the freemium tier, and the whole goal is to build usage over time and incentivize that upgrade. But if 70% of your user base is just never going to pay you, can they be adding value? And some add value through being part of a community. So Lose It is a great example of a subscription app where the freemium tier, people are adding to the community, and there's value in them being part of the app. And so they have that freemium tier. But ads are the primary monetization model for a freemium tier to monetize those free users. The challenge is ads suck. We've just, degenerated into this just cesspool of ads being the lowest common denominator, worst experience. So, my weather app currently has ads in it. We're actually going to pull the ads from this update that we're working on currently. And part of it is that I just kept getting customer support complaints like, hey, why are you advertising guns in your app? It's like, dang it. I checked all the boxes in Google of don't show this kind of ad, don't show that kind of ad. And I chose to make less revenue by checking all these boxes to limit what was shown. And people were still seeing offensive ads. And then the other one I got a lot of customer support on was gambling. There would be this animation of slot machines. And it was one of the most popular ads in my app. And it was just so annoying as an experience. So I don't have a solution yet. So right now I'm actually going to hard paywall my weather app and not have a freemium tier, just specifically because as a weather app paying for weather data, it's too expensive to offer much of a freemium tier. And I don't want to offer such a terrible experience where they're not getting a bit of that full experience. So I'm going to hard paywall until I find a better solution. But I think that's part of what we're going to see over the next 5 or 10 years. And hopefully in a shorter term, I'm going to certainly be working really hard to figure out better ways to do this, better ad networks, better opportunities to provide a freemium tier where I can still make a little bit of money to offset the costs. But it's a huge challenge. And I think it's something that we need to figure out. Like, to me, I want as many people as possible to experience the value that I'm creating in my apps. And so I don't want to be super restrictive on my freemium tier, but I'm a business, and the more money I can make, the more I can reinvest in the product. And so there's a tension there of being able to offer freemium and not be able to offer freemium. And I think over time we'll find better and better ways. And you see that with the biggest players in the space right now. And I think Disney and Netflix are actually in some ways going to lead in this direction. Is that I think it was Netflix is charging a $30 CPM with no data collection, very minimal like data sharing and everything like that. And, I'm not going to be able to get that in my weather app. But one thing I have considered is sponsorship, finding kind of a corporate sponsor who is aligned to the weather app and could kind of create a better experience around ads that's more of a sponsorship model. So I think there's ways to figure this out. And I think the apps that do are going to really thrive in the coming years. And I think more and more apps are going to be looking for this. I mean, if Netflix and Disney Plus are looking for options that offer a better freemium or a lower cost tier, I think all apps need to be considering freemium in all the ways they can.
Absolutely. 1000%. And the thing is, so I've been talking about the race for the streaming wars over the last probably year and a half on my newsletter every Friday, looking at some aspect of how it's evolving and changing. And in the beginning, in the old days, in the 2020s, wow, the 2020s, in 2020, you started seeing all this growth around, I'm going to come in, I'm going to give you premium content, HBO level content. And for those of you who are as old as me and remember that HBO used to be the premium channel on cable, it used to be you know what I'm talking about. For them to say we have a 7-day free trial that you can just enable to see all of our premium content, but that's not it, because we're also going to take movies that would go to theaters and give them to you just like that. And I'm not even talking about Disney Plus's model of the premium 30 or so bucks for the privilege of seeing it early. I'm talking about HBO just giving it to you. I knew that this can't continue. It's not the kind of thing that's scalable. It's not the kind of thing that they can make money on. But they did it because they, one, wanted to experiment with subscriptions, and two, wanted to become the leader. And they have become the leader. You can see that week in and week out. It's one of the top grossing apps in the US, only below YouTube for the most part. And YouTube is kind of doing the same thing. Ads on YouTube are incredibly annoying, and for whatever YouTube premium costs now, which has gone up over the years, but it's still not something that's super crazy, you get to get rid of them. Or if you're watching this, I recently started monetizing the channel, which means I get to turn off ads. So I turned off ads for this live stream. So hopefully you're not seeing any ads. And if you are seeing ads, let me know. I'll figure that out. But that's kind of a part of what I want to do. I want to make ads go away. So in a way, we're all looking for a better way to do freemium, because now if you look at HBO Max, no free trial. You have to pay. Right. The price has gone up as recent as a few months ago. I wrote about the differences in how much money they're making. And the thing is, which is both cool and a double-edged sword in this case, if you look at the revenue estimates for HBO Max, and you can correlate price changes to just immediate increases in monthly revenue, which is great because they built this sort of cult following in a way off of giving promotions and making it very easy. And people just stuck around because it just made sense. And I'm not talking about the people who come in just for the one show and then leave. I'm talking about everyone else. And an upsell of $1 or an increase of $1 in the price just skyrockets their revenue. And that's one of the things that I think is very challenging to do right, but also very incredibly important for a developer to think about. Something that I never wanted. When we started, I was very much against price experimentation because I didn't love the idea of one user seeing one price, and then if they subscribe again in a month, they'll see a different price. And for a good like 6 years out of our existence, we didn't do anything. We stuck with the same price, which was a terrible idea. If you have had your price the same for more than a year, you're probably doing something wrong because you're continuing to add value. You're continuing to improve your app, hopefully. And if you're not, that's a whole other thing.
Hey, and you got me. We were talking about this before
Yeah.
before we started the live stream. So I signed up for Appfigures in probably early 2009 during the beta. We found my number. I was like 1,600. I was the 1,600th person. And I've been paying you every month since 2009. So I've been paying you as an app developer this whole time, and you've continued to deliver value. And I don't remember when, but you got me off of my grandfathered plan because you offered value in the ASO tool side. So now I'm on the, I think you said I'm on the monitor plan. I don't even pay attention because it's like, I'm going to pay Appfigures forever. If I have an app, I mean, it's like a fundamental layer of my like tool stack to operate a app business. And so the only thing I look at is like, what value am I getting and is it worth it? And so now I'm on the monitor plan where I do have access to the ASO tools, and those were valuable enough for me to be willing to upgrade. I'm like, that's the way you do it. That's the way you, and that's what you were getting to. I kind of interrupted you, but that's, I mean, that's why HBO can raise the price, because they're creating really great, valuable content, and they're offering, like you said, the in-theater movies at home, and they're offering these Game of Thrones shows. What's the latest one? Anyways, they're offering these shows that you can't get anywhere else. And that's again another kind of like, what is the future of subscription apps? It's offering value. It's delivering value. That's how you increase your price. That's how you get more customers. That's how you overcome subscription fatigue. That's how you reduce churn, is that you offer value and you keep offering more and more and more value.
Yeah, exactly. So you mentioned the word churn, which I want to talk about. And I also want to talk about the idea of increasing pricing for mere mortal apps that are not HBO Max. But before I do that, I just want to ask you for a small favor. If you can hit the like button, because we are on YouTube and I am all about optimization, help me out. Give this video a like. It will take us to the top of YouTube when people look for subscriptions. So make me and David YouTube stars. Hit the like button. I'm going to keep an eye on it. So if you don't do that, I will remind you again in a few minutes. But I also say that everyone should ask for ratings in their app the exact same way that I'm asking for a thumbs up here. It makes such a big difference for algorithms because they rely on this so much, whether you're on the App Store or on YouTube. But going back to pricing, every developer that I've talked to over the last year when talking about subscriptions ask me, should I change my price? And the answer is always no. You should experiment with your price, in my opinion.
Right.
It's not very easy to experiment with pricing. I mean, it is technically, let's put the how you do it technically aside, because with you, it's a lot easier. And
we've got a pretty cool product we're releasing next month. So.
Ooh.
Yeah, we've had a beta version of our price experiments feature for 18 months now.
Oh, cool.
But the challenge, and you kind of hit the nail on the head, is that experimenting well is very challenging. Like you can throw two different prices into a Firebase A/B test and say, 1999 generated this number of conversions, and 999 generated that number of conversions, and pick the winner based on just raw numbers.
Yeah.
But that's actually not a great way to price experiment for a subscription app, because that's not taking into account churn and so many other things. And so it's taken us so long to get this out of beta, because we ended up hiring a data scientist who spent the last year digging really deep. And so we're introducing next month a price experimentation feature that's incredibly sophisticated and does the kind of analysis that gives you a more meaningful representation of what should win and understands statistical significance and those sorts of things. So I'll let you finish your pricing theory part, but from a technical standpoint, yeah, there are better and better tools, and we're one of them to do a price experiment in a sophisticated way without having to, write a ton of code and hire a data scientist yourself.
And that's an absolutely valid point. I was talking to a developer friend who has a very successful app who fairly recently, a couple of years ago, transitioned from a paid model to subscriptions and has been asking me all these questions that are really valuable to me as a data provider because it gives me an understanding of kind of what's missing out there and what sort of data issues there are that we can help with. And one of them is understanding what's working. Like you said, it's not exactly just looking at the numbers. So even if you have the tools to do testing, or if you're doing now and later type tests, understanding them is such a big thing. And not having the tools means that for him, he doesn't have the tools and he doesn't do any sort of experiment. So he has no idea if his pricing is the best that it can be, which means that he's probably not making the most. And it's funny because in our early days, a lot of people came up to me and said, "You're not charging enough." And I laughed and kind of shrugged it off as I know what I'm doing. Leave me alone. And in retrospect, I didn't. I definitely didn't charge enough. And it's one of those things that I think as a developer, you will always charge less than you want to. It's kind of like all the contractors that I talk to who do iOS development or any sort of development. Like, oh, we can probably charge 10% more and we'll still be okay. But we don't know if we should do it. Yeah. And there isn't really even
if you're gonna
go ahead.
If you're going to err on one side, though, I would say you should err on the side of charging less than err on the side of charging more. And that goes back to everything that we've been talking about, is that you want the customer to feel like they're getting a deal. You want them to feel like it's valuable enough. And you want them to feel like, I could cancel that, but it's really not that much money and it's okay. So if you're going to err on one side, err on charging less money as you build your business. Unless, I mean, some apps are in a place where it's like they really need to like milk every penny because they're advertising on Facebook and they need to get that return on ad spend to be able to keep that cash flow going, so they're not going into debt acquiring users. There are cases where you're going to want to kind of milk it, but especially early on, it's okay to leave some money on the table and make your users feel like they're getting a great deal. And you kind of alluded to this earlier about your advice is to not change your price. And I totally agree. Especially if you're a smaller app, if you don't have that really deep, clear product market fit where you have amazing retention, people love the app, people are sharing it. Like if you don't have that like really clear love for your product, raising your price is probably going to be a disaster because it's just going to lead to a lot of churn, because you're going to force churn by forcing that decision of, do I pay $15 a month instead of 10, or do I pay $60 a year instead of 30? But when your app is more mature and you've had the opportunity to actually experiment with price on the front end of new users coming in. So if you're experimenting with price and you realize, okay, $20 a year really is too cheap, and 30 or 35 really is the sweet spot for our app. And then wait and look at some of those cohorts over time and make sure that they're not churning at higher rates. Again, make sure that, your churn generally is in a good place. Then like once you've checked like probably 6 different boxes, and I'm not going to come up with a list off the top of my head. I should probably like write a blog post about this.
Yeah, but that's for a whole other live stream, how to test pricing.
But you need to tick all those boxes before you even think about raising your price on existing users. So existing subscriptions, cherish those and be very careful with them, because you don't want to force that decision that leads to a bunch of churn. But once you've really determined that you are offering enough value that new users are willing to pay more, that new users who pay more aren't churning, then start thinking about maybe you should raise your prices. But even then, tread very carefully.
Exactly. And I think the way that you can do it by introducing more features in a different plan, the way we've done it, the way I've seen a bunch of other apps do it, it's kind of the easy way to do it, the least, I think, forceful way to do it, because then you're really doing everything we talked about today. You're adding more value, you're making it very apparent, and you're understanding what your users are here for. And we've been saying churn for the last few minutes quite a few times. So I ran a poll in the chat asking, do you keep track of your churn? 69% said yes. So I'm very happy to hear that. That's a little bit more surprising than surprising, a little bit more than I expected. But 23% said not really, and 8% replied with a what's churn. So that is another problem. And I think as a trend, that's something that I've been seeing over the last year or so. More people are understanding that there are more metrics that they're not using, and they're trying to understand them. Churn is probably one of the simplest yet most complicated concepts in subscriptions that I've seen for some reason that I don't necessarily get. I wrote a whole guide on what is churn and how to understand it, how to calculate it. We do that automatically for you. Another thing I don't understand is why Apple doesn't give that to you. Google, not even close. But it's actually really, really simple at the end of the day. It's a way to look at the number of people who have stopped subscribing, not in reference to new people who are subscribing. So you're not muddling your data. You're looking at, if my churn continues, regardless of growth, am I still going to be making money in a month? That's kind of the gist of what it is. And it's an important metric that I can't stress how important it is to look at, because it's going to be some number that for your app is hopefully always going down. So if it's 3% now, you should work to make it 2%. If it's 15%, you should work to make it 14%. While there are gauges for what's good, what's bad, it doesn't really matter at the end of the day, because your app is your app and your users are your users. But
Absolutely.
It's the trend of this. And it's such an important metric to understand what to do. So if you're trying a new price, after a couple of months, if your churn went up because of this new price, do not continue, because even if you're making more money, you are sacrificing actual paying subscribers. Actually, I shouldn't say don't do it. I should say look at the data and see if the increase in churn is actually worth the increase in revenue. And
Right.
that's one of the bigger trends overall that we're seeing, and we're trying to address with new reports and new ways to analyze the data, is people need this data, and it's super complicated if you want to go all the way deep, but it doesn't have to be. Really, at the end of the day, Apple gives you 75 different metrics for subscriptions, and we've flattened them over the years because that's a much easier way to think about it. But we're talking about 70 plus metrics. Who wants to keep track of 70 plus metrics? That's impossible.
Yeah.
And so we've been
Yeah,
working.
something we've worked really hard at RevenueCat as well. Churn. Yeah. I mean, if you're working in the subscription app space, and it's cool because a lot of people, you and I have done webinars together before and everything. And I think some people don't quite understand how different Appfigures is from RevenueCat, and why we can do these webinars and be like, we have a dashboard that does subscriptions and Appfigures has it, but we actually don't compete.
It's totally different data under the hood.
So Appfigures pulls all your data from the App Store Connect, which is great and gives you kind of a meaningful overview. What's different with RevenueCat is because we actually manage the transactions and have your App Store receipt on our server and are able to update that over time. We're actually able to track churn on a user level in a way that allows some pretty sophisticated segmentation. And our churn chart is one of my favorite things to look at in the RevenueCat dashboard. And again, it's one of those things, like you said, I mean, I'm sure Calm has some dashboard deep inside their like BI tools that multiple data scientists have worked on, whatever. But when you're an indie app developer, or even like medium and larger size companies, when you can shift those resources to focus more on product instead of having to build out your own internal BI. So this is, something we're really focused on at RevenueCat, is like, what are all these things that we can expose, and how can we expose it in a way that's very unique to the data set that we have? So part of what's unique about our data is that we have it at a user level. So you can segment by install month, by install week. And so you can understand like, oh, that week I did a huge experiment with my onboarding. And then the next week I actually reverted that experiment. So let's go, or the week before was kind of the control. So let's segment by those two separate weeks and look at what the churn looks like based on that. Another really cool thing that we do is that we actually know the auto renew status of people. And so in our churn chart, there's actually a dashed section at the end of our churn chart that actually tells you the number of people who currently have auto renew on, who would potentially renew in that next week, that next month, that next year. And so we're able to kind of give you a little bit of a predictive metric based on their auto renew status. So when people turn off auto renew, we know within minutes, if you have server to server notifications set up, we know within like 12 to 24 hours if we're polling and you don't have that enabled. And so there's a lot that we do. And then there's like some charts that I'm like just dying for us to, we have them like spec'd out, we're going to build them, but there's just like really cool stuff that you're able to do when you have access to that level of data. So yeah, churn is such a fun topic, and that's one of the charts that I think we do a really amazing job at exposing in a way that really is meaningful to your business to understand what's going on in the app.
I think we talked about this just before the show about how there is all this depth, and this could be said about almost everything related to subscriptions. But because it's a new concept, and because I think a lot of people that are transitioning to subscriptions or starting with subscriptions, I don't know if they necessarily are even thinking they want to do this because it's so much early in the process, and that's something we're working on. How do we simplify the data that already exists as opposed to going deep? We're trying to go a level up. We're trying to go even higher level in order to make the basics so much easier. When we started Appfigures, it was all about downloads and revenue, and we had an email report that tells you your downloads and your revenue every morning. And my philosophy is that data should come to you. You can go and look at data when you're ready, when you're in that optimization point. You should be able to touch everything and tweak everything. But for the most part, when you're monitoring, it's all about what was my revenue yesterday or over the last week, how many downloads. That's 2009, 2010. And now with subscriptions, it's what's my monthly recurring revenue, my MRR? What's my churn? Is my churn going up or down? How much money did I make? That's really, at the end of the day, what it is. And there isn't an easy way to get that out of Apple, out of Google, and that's what we're doing, which is very interesting. So like you were saying before, it's not a matter of competing. It's a matter of we're trying to educate and enable from two really different sides of subscriptions to really help developers focus on making apps, making products, making better products. And a big thing for us from day one was how do we take away the part that's overwhelming, silly, doesn't really jive with everything else, so you can make better games, better apps, because we're the consumers of these apps at the end of the day. I use so many apps on my phone, a lot of them from indie developers who have amazing idea. One good example is Curtis Herbert, who has been on the show many years ago, is incredibly smart about subscriptions. And we've talked about subscriptions and pricing over the years so many times. And he is taking those ideas and applying them at a regional level, changing his pricing between subscriptions and consumable in-app purchases. And that's really, I think, he's probably a year or two ahead of most people that I've talked to. But that's really what it is. If you can leverage your data, whether it's the high-level data or the very specific data to make those decisions, that's really where you win and you start thinking in a way to experiment. There was actually a question in the chat. Is there a definitive way to attribute what the conversion to paying subscribers, for example, Apple search ads campaign? And that's something that David said RevenueCat is doing or will be doing soon. I don't know if I can say that in public.
We actually just introduced over the summer
hooray.
Our App Store search ads integration. And so that's actually a cool way that you can segment our churn chart, is that if you connect our App Store search ads integration, you will get campaign level and ad group level segmentation of not all our charts, but a lot of our charts. And then we're working toward eventually exposing keywords in some way. But you can go into churn and say, okay, this ad group or this campaign, what does churn look like for that ad group in that campaign? So to answer the question more specifically, yes, you can, using the, and what's great about, Apple's giving itself a little bit of favor in, first party data tracking, just a little bit.
Yeah.
But with App Store search ads, you get actually 100% coverage,
Mm-hmm.
and no like false positives. Part of the problem with attribution in the past is that even though people presented it as deterministic, something like 40% of US consumers had turned on limit ad tracking. So they had turned off the IDFA. So before ATT even existed, something like 40% of US traffic didn't even have an IDFA anyway. And so attribution providers were making best guess, and they had really sophisticated tools to make those guesses. But now with search ads, if it has a search ad tag, you know it was downloaded because of search ad. Now there's
Yep.
complications like multi-touch and things like that, where it, you know, if they've seen multiple ads and just and then they search your brand,
Yeah.
and then you have to do brand defense, or you don't have to, but a lot of people do brand defense. So you don't necessarily know why they downloaded it through App Store search ads, and that's a whole nother topic. But you do actually get 100% coverage that they downloaded it. And then I think very few people are doing it these days. I don't think you necessarily need to, but if you ask for permission to track, then Apple does give you a tiny bit more data. They give you the date of when it was clicked, the date and time, so that you can more directly associate those things. But yeah, App Store search ads, I mean, it's my top recommendation for getting started in promoting your app. You know, some keywords are super crowded. If you have a meditation app, you're really probably going to have a very hard time making App Store search ads work. If you have a mortgage calculator app, you know, mortgage related keywords are super valuable. I mean, it's similar with like Google AdWords. It's and it follows a very similar pattern. Like certain keywords are going to be super valuable. But if you're in a space where the keyword's not like crazy competitive, App Store search ads are a great place to start your paid marketing, in part because they're super high intent. You know, somebody searching mortgage calculator is probably very high intent to download a mortgage calculator app.
Yep, it's all about intent.
Super high intent. And then the tracking is that App Store search ads do have the best tracking in the industry now, because they do give you 100% coverage. So yes, you can, through the RevenueCat App Store search ads integration, get 100% coverage on understanding which downloads came through search ads, and then therefore get all the long-term revenue metrics, churn metrics, and anything else you want to see.
I think that's incredibly valuable, and this is a great lead-in to the end of this, because we are out of time. As much as I would like to continue. We should have made this
2 hours.
Yeah. I'm trying to be really good about time, because I know people have meetings and other things, and some people have to just leave. But I will gladly have you again to continue this in the future. I'm sure there's going to be more to talk about. I actually took notes during this because there are 4 other topics I want to bring you on for.
Yeah, I don't think, I mean, I sent you a list of talking points. I don't think we even hit like a third of them. So
yeah, we're probably at that little mark. But I think it's been amazingly valuable, because just to think about the fact that this will change and there's more. But to bring this to your last point, I think Apple search ads have become a fundamental way to get traffic because of intent, because people are in the App Store already. And Apple made them so easy, and they're not overcrowded in a sense that from a user perspective, you're not inundated with ads. When you search in the App Store, you only see the one, unlike Google that has a bunch of ads and it becomes kind of iffy. So I think from a user perspective, the experience is kind of seamless. There's some people who don't even realize they're clicking on an ad or tapping on an ad, which could be, let's just say that's how it is. But
I saw my wife go to download Audible on her phone, and she searches Audible. I mean, brand, keyword, everything. And I saw her tap on the ad, and like,
yeah, exactly.
It like broke my heart, because it was like, you know, I mean, well, Amazon, who cares, right? But it's like, like, you know, somebody's paying to capture their own brand. It just feels like extortion, but that's all another
absolutely.
topic.
I spoke to a journalist about this not too long ago, about that being extortion. And there's an article coming out in the Financial Times soon that will have my thoughts on it, and also a bunch of data. And the data is coming from a new tool we're working on for Apple Search Ad Intelligence, because Apple search ads have become so important, but it's so easy to throw your money, to burn your money on search ads, especially if you're using basic. Do not use basic search ads. Yuck. But even on the advanced side, there's so many things going on, and Apple gives you little to no visibility. You get the popularity score, but that's pretty much it. And from our perspective, we want to introduce visibility into this very important thing that you can do to make more money. So starting the, how do I do campaigns? Who's competing with me? How many people, how many apps are actually doing brand protection? Something that I think is a mistake. It is extortion. It's not a mistake in the sense that you can't or shouldn't do it, but it's a mistake in that it should not be something that you absolutely have to do. And we can talk about that for days.
Yeah.
But that's really what it is. The industry is moving in that direction, and it's all happening in the App Store. And the connection between paying for ads and getting paying subscribers is actually big. And I think that's a good thing. I think that means that ads are not too ugly in that sense from a user perspective, and subscriptions are not too off-putting. So there is this cycle that you can pay to get engagement, and then using organic App Store optimization and other mechanisms to make sure that your app is visible and is as optimized with product page optimizations and A/B testing and custom product pages. Between all of those, you can really, really succeed on the App Store and make recurring revenue work for you. So ultimately, if you take all of this and put it into practice, I think you can see more money in a way that continues to grow. It's not just a one-time hit. And that's the key, hopefully, that people will take out of all of this. Optimization is actually fairly easy, fairly accessible to most, and in my opinion, the only way to go if you want to continue growing. And that's really all the time we have. Is there anything you want to end with, David?
Let me give like a 90-second explanation. I don't think a lot of people really understand what RevenueCat does.
Go for it.
So we have native SDKs for Flutter, for React Native, native iOS written in Swift, native Android, Unity, which is actually a really complex one internally. So these native SDKs actually manage the App Store purchase experience. So you're not relying on your own code, which I know it's like, oh, you don't want to put a third party in the middle, but RevenueCat, we see about $2 billion a year in revenue now across Stripe, iOS, and Android. And we've found all those crazy edge cases. We see them at scale. Like, we have solved this, and there's still edge cases we have to work on. It's not perfect, but you can trust our code. It's open source. You can fork it if you need to make some little change or there's a bug or whatever. So those SDKs manage the transaction internally, and then we send the App Store receipts to our server and then manage that server side to become your single source of truth for subscription status, which is actually pretty confusing and hard to build for. All the edge cases around that too. My wife and I for a long time shared App Store accounts. So you would have her sign up for her email address on a Headspace subscription, but have my App Store receipt. And then I would sign up for an account and have my App Store receipt. So you have two separate accounts with the same App Store receipt. And there's like all sorts of crazy edge cases around that, like who gets the subscription, and so we become that single source of truth for that subscription status on the server. And then we maintain that in near real time through pulling Apple's servers and ingesting their server to server notifications, which again allows us to do really cool things. Like if you want to send a win-back campaign, we know within seconds or minutes when somebody turns off auto renew, that's a great time to send an email and say, hey, 50% off. And so we can automate that through our integration. So we integrate with like OneSignal and Braze and Iterable and these other CRM type platforms where you can build those win-back campaigns on top of it. There's so much more we do. The charts are really sophisticated. We have like 40 engineers now working on this full time, and a data scientist and front-end engineers and back-end engineers and product managers who all we do is think about subscriptions. And so one of the things you were talking about earlier that is really exciting is that the future of subscription is in part being more empowered to build a business. And that's what we're doing. It's like end to end. If you're building a subscription app, we're the tool that helps you do what Calm's doing without having to hire 5 data scientists and a whole team of engineers to build and then troubleshoot and then maintain and then fix when Apple changes things. And so we handle all of that end to end. And again, that's why we're not a competitor to Appfigures at all.
We're doing the same thing on the reporting side and on the App Store optimization side, the competitor intelligence side, which at the end of the day are all parts of you start here and you go as deep as you would like to get. Maybe we'll have some deep links in the future that can just take us from one to the other and make it easy for people to kind of continue the journey, really. That's the way I see it.
Yeah, that's a great idea. We should,
Yeah. I'll send you an email later.
In Appfigures, and then pop over to RevenueCat to like, okay, now I want to segment that by whatever.
Yep.
And since you don't have the individual user data, you can't do that kind of segmentation. It's a great idea. Love it.
So you start at the high level with us, and we have such a big breadth of data between your App Store optimization and your Apple search ad intelligence and your competitor intelligence. And when you're ready to go in very, very deep, be it a win-back campaign or really anything like that or attribution, you can continue. But that's, again, what it's all about. You have to start at the top and continue going in. So that's...
And it's great that there's so many different providers in the space too. Like, Appfigures builds... I mean, to me, I've been paying you for 13 years now, every
Yeah.
month. It's like a fundamental tool of running my business, just like RevenueCat now has become a fundamental tool of running my app business, empowering my subscriptions. And that's what's cool about this space. And what I think we're going to just see more and more of in the future is that great tools are going to be built. Jake Moore, who we were talking about, he now builds Superwall, which is a paywall building and experimentation product.
Yep.
So now you can layer that on top of RevenueCat and have these incredible paywalls and be able to test your paywalls and iterate on your paywalls from the web without having to push an app store update just to make a minor change to test a new paywall or fix a bug in your paywall or something like that. And so there's just going to be more and more tools where you can focus. And this is really the key to everything we were talking about. And a great place to end on is that you should be focused on delivering value to your customers.
Yep.
And
Absolutely.
business analytics is great for your company. You need to do that, but that does not provide value to your customers. Paywall optimization does not add value to your customers. Subscription metrics and handling the purchases and the base infrastructure of your subscription app business does not add value to your customers. Mm-hmm. And so, with those three tools specifically, you can have that world-class infrastructure supporting you so that your engineering team, your product managers can be solely focused on building an incredible product that delivers value to users and makes it worth paying a subscription for.
Exactly. That is very, very true. Now, I know there were a few questions in the chat that we didn't get to, so after we're done here, I'm going to go through them and answer them in the comments. So if you asked a question in the chat, I will answer it in the comments. David can also jump in if you have a few free moments, David, afterwards. Go in and try to help people. I know there are questions about whether you should whether you should switch from a successful in-app purchase, consumable in-app purchase business to a subscription app. And there's no yes or no. It's a conversation really and a bunch of questions, and another about what are good categories for a subscription app. Again, not really a yes or no or a definitive answer, but more a series of questions. And I'm going to drop my thoughts into that. Also, we talked about a bunch of different things like David's community and David's newsletter and podcast and other things that are happening. I'm going to have links to all of those later on in a pinned comment. So if you want to be involved in any of those or you want to continue listening to David's great thoughts, you'll be able to click and go directly there. We also had Jake Moore from Superwall on the show a few months ago. Again, amazing feedback. We had Dan from Nami, another company that does something similar, also on the show. Amazing ideas and thoughts. For example, the fact that you need to have multiple paywalls and not just one. A lot of people think about paywall as a single paywall, and that's not the case if you want to optimize. And these tools make it super easy. So my friend who doesn't rely on any tools because he likes building his own isn't able to do any of this. And he's sitting by, looking from the sideline thinking, it would be cool if I can make these little changes that Ariel told me about right now, but I'm going to wait until my next update. That's not how you can continue to grow now that things are maturing. So, David, thank you for joining me on this. We didn't get to talk about everything we wanted, but that just means we have to continue later on. So if you will join us, there will be more in the future. And
sounds great. It was fun chatting.
Yeah, absolutely. So we'll do this again. Thank you, everyone, for joining us and taking the time. I know we're running a little bit late, but hopefully it was worth it. If you have any more questions, drop them in the comments because the chat is going away. But drop them in the comments. We'll go through those and we'll do our best to answer them. Otherwise, I will see you in the next live stream in a few weeks to talk about Apple search ads, because that's a topic everyone has asked about in my last live stream and obviously even in this live stream. So it's becoming mainstream, a lot of streams. In any case, enjoy the rest of your day or evening wherever you are in the world, and I'll see you again in a few weeks. Take care, everyone. It's been a pleasure.
Bye, everybody.